Is there any policy that the CCP has, and it could be anything from economics to immigration to school curriculum, just any random policy that the CCP has about how they run China that you think is better than America?
Any policy that CCP has that is better than America? There are probably a lot of them. Okay. The problem with it is that because it's so because it's coming from the top down, there might be some shorter term benefits to it that is better than in America, but longer term is not as good, right? So let me see if I could find a good example here. I don't know specifics, but I'm sure there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot. Okay. But the thing is that when you have centralized authority, okay, sometimes centralized authority comes up with decisions that are better than the decisions coming up that democracies have come up with. Okay. But those are short term successes because it doesn't come from the trial and error from the people. It's not a bottom up discovery of the right way. It's a top down approach of some the elites figuring like deciding and sometimes correctly figuring out this is the right way. Even when you have some short term successes because you have a better plan, because it wasn't a bottom up approach, longer term, you're not going to be better off, right? So like imagine two different parenting styles. One of them is allowing the kid to make mistakes and fall and stumble all the time. And then you have a helicopter parent that is just watching the kid all the time and telling them to what step to make every single time. And you can see that the other kid, the second kid, is making a lot more correct decisions compared to the first child, right? But longer term, the first child is going to be better off because it went through that process, right? So democracies a lot of times look at
Only
inefficient.
if
Many
the parent
times they're
eventually is not gonna
slow.
be making decisions. That's the thing, like, that only
No,
works
that's
in if the parent eventually won't be making decisions. If the parent will always be there to make decisions, then
yeah. Well, the parents will. Okay, so well, they're not going to be there because one wise you might have a wise leader that is from the top down is making good decisions, and tomorrow the leader from the top down is going to be somebody retarded, right? So you might have a good ruler that has figured out that this policy really works, but it's not the system. Like the you don't have the institutions, you don't have the culture to have the participation of the crowd, and the wisdom of the crowd on average makes better decisions than the elites. So the wisdom of the crowd is slower, is inefficient, but on average, longer term makes better decisions than any elites, right? Shorter term centralized command structures look very impressive, right? Longer term, they look less impressive. So you might see like all of a sudden the elites in China figuring out like, oh, we're in response to this. Obviously, we have to do this. And then you look in the United States, like they're 10 years or 20 years, they're passing laws, it's not passing. There's so many checks and balances, and they still haven't figured it out that they need to do that. So you remember, like, oh my God, that the Chinese model or any dictatorial or centralized command model looks more efficient. We should go with that. But that's only short term. If you zoom out and look long term, allowing people to go through this checks and balance, slowing it down and letting people make mistakes and improving the maturity of your society and the crowd. And again, not when I say maturity, I'm talking about the wisdom of a crowd. I'm not saying individual people are going to get wiser. They don't, okay? But the whole system, when the trial and error, somehow it gets hard coded into its traditions and its institutions. So, for example, America doesn't have better people. America doesn't have wiser people. Why is it such a much more advanced country? Because it has better cultures and it has better institutions. It is, but like it is in every metric, Americans have lived better lives than the Chinese, right? But why is it? Why is America the world
oh, whoa,
superpower?
wow.
As does it have
You
more
think
intelligent?
Americans on average have a better lifestyle than the Chinese?
Yeah, every metric shows that. Every single metric shows that the Americans' lives on average are living better lives than the Chinese. Every single metric shows that. Right. But again, it's really impressive to see, like, all of a sudden, if you need like a giant road, like the Chinese, like they make a road, they make a railway. If they need 10 factories, all of a sudden there's 10 factories. If there's COVID and you need 50 hospitals, all of a sudden if there's 50 hospitals out of nowhere, it looks very impressive, right? But it's just not longer term, the slower method with more mistakes, with more on trial and error, where you actually the people are participating in the decision making process. That makes whatever eventually works. It gets sewed into the fabric of the society as institutions and cultures and traditions, and that works better. It creates a Darwinian model where the best methods will win, and that Darwinian model will produce better results than whatever elite could come up with. Even the wisest people, philosopher kings or the elite of society could not come up with better policies than the Darwinian model from a people, from a society that you give them enough liberty to make their own decisions. And China
Right.
doesn't give liberty to its people. Anyways, let's move on.
We have Guy to respond to this.
So real quickly to sort of expand and go deep into what Armin said, but I'll do it briefly. The problem with a centralized system is that it's essentially algorithmic. So you have a group of people making decisions, and they could be very good at making decisions. At the end of the day, they're going to have blind spots, necessarily. Some blind spots they're going to have. And if they are in charge of themselves, they are going to fall for those blind spots. And at some point, that's going to be catastrophic. Like there are things that they will fundamentally not do well. And a open society is more of a dynamical system where it's constantly responding to things as they come up, and therefore it's more flexible. If you have elites, they can be, especially if they're really good at some things, they would be sure that they're good at all things, or rather that whenever they make a decision, they do it for the right reasons. The problem there is that in those cases that they're wrong, they're A, not going to notice it in time, and B, they're not going to have the capability of pivoting and changing what they're doing. And that's why you need some sort of decentralized decision making for a society to function well. Now, CCP specifically has a bit more of that because they have like subsidiaries, like they have local systems, but at the end of the day, they still have the problems of top-down decision making. And you can see that like with things they've done in the car market. So the plus side is they had, or the electric car market, they had a whole bunch of companies compete with each other through market means to see what works best. They did some subsidies and stuff that ended up not being sustainable. And so now we're seeing some meaningful collapse there. So some things are surviving because they have a hybrid model of top-down decisions and market forces. But every so often you see like a massive downside of the centralization part of the system, which is not to say that there shouldn't be any centralization part of systems of governance, but not in the way that it's done in communist societies.